So first thing to do before we jack the car up is to release both the wheel nuts and the hub nuts. This is using the E10 Torx key that you need to undo the vacuum hubs. Now you need to get the brake calipers off, just put a spanner on the back and you should be able to just lift the caliper up and remove the brake pads. These are old brake pads on this particular picture, they just get prized out and then the caliper can be lifted and tied away. And then you can remove the carrier itself, the two large bolts on the back. The disc is quite often corroded on. There's a little bolt hole that you can run a bolt into, wind the bolt in and the disc will come away. And now you can unbolt the hub using the E10 Torx socket. This car has ABS, so there's an ABS sensor to remove from the back. And ready for some improper tool use, a screwdriver as a crowbar. And also gently ease away the vacuum pipes from the vacuum units. Next we remove the swivel seal bolts from the back. It's best if you soak these before you start because they can corrode in and they will snap. And then we do the tie rod ends using a ball joint splitter to release the tie rods. And now, to my mind, the most difficult part of the job is removing the circuit from the end of the drive shaft. My circuit pliers would not fit inside this circuit at all. And put all of the pipes and the ABS sensor tightly out the way. Now ready to get the Kingpin bolts out. Undo the Kingpin bolts, top and bottom, 8 in all. This lower Kingpin was the rusty failed one and it took a lot of levering to get it out with the official levering tool. At this stage you can then remove the hub and the drive shaft. And here is the rusted out Kingpin bearing that had failed on the driver's side. Clean everything up. Right, tool perfectionist, look away now. As you're about to see some more tool abuse, a 1-inch imperial socket fits lovely into the Kingpin race. Apply some force and drive the race out. And the other side as well. And even more tool abuse coming up using the special oil seal removing claw hammer. Oil seals should really be just pushed home with your fingers. You can push this one in quite a long way so it's all nice and square, and then using some end of an old rubber hammer just drive it in the last bit. Now to fit the races themselves, again protecting them with a piece of wood, drive them in with a suitable hammer. Probably should have done this before, put the races on, but put the seal components, the big swivel seal components, in the right order that they came out of the packaging. Now to grease the bearings, get a polythene bag, put the bearing in the bag, get some waterproof grease, put some of this grease into the bag, seal the bag, and then manipulate the bag with your fingers to force the grease into the bearing and preload the bearing with grease. Now with the top bearing in place, we're going to refit the drive shaft and refit the hub. You then, as you fit the hub, have to squeeze the bottom bearing into its race because otherwise it will just drop out as you fit the hub. So you've got to sort of hold the bearing in place whilst manipulating the hub into position. Now to refit the kingpins, make sure the one that came out the top goes back in the top. Take the shims, I use the smallest shim from the kit, put it onto the end of the kingpin and put some grease onto that. And then using the sealant, run a small bead of sealant around just the very base of the kingpin itself. I actually used too much sealant on this one and had to wipe some of it off. Now bolt up and torque up to the correct torque the kingpins themselves, and nothing else is connected at this point, and then check that the hub moves through its full arc of movement in a lovely smooth motion with no stiffness and no lumpiness at all. It's just a matter of feeling it. It says in the manual to use a spring balance to 45 newtons acceleration, but I just feel that you can just feel when it's right. Run grease around the swivel itself, just a small amount of grease in the lip, and then do up the swivel seal. Because the tie rods have been loosened, they rotate when you try to tighten, and therefore I've used a jack in order to put some load on the joint, and then you can tighten and torque up the ends of the tie rods correctly. And then it's down to the Haynes manual process, which says that reassembly is the reverse of disassembly. So carriers on, then the brake pads go in place, make sure the vacuum lines and the ABS sensor are all in place. Don't forget to fit the circlip on the end of the drive shaft. Fit the vacuum hub, making sure that all of the edges, the faces that it fits to, are clean and free of grease. Now here you can see a deliberate mistake. I only did up the wheel nuts finger tight before releasing the jack. This meant that the wheel was actually not sitting square on the chamfers correctly on the alloy wheel nuts, and although it was then torqued up to the correct torque, the wheel was not completely seated properly and just about shook me to death with death wobble when I took it out for its first run.